Some people have deep roots in their communities because of a lifetime of work in roles that deal with the public. They might be, for example, a business person, a civil servant, or a lawyer, dentist, or physician. These community members who have such experiences are able to reflect extensively on who we are in our towns and cities. As a father, husband, teacher, and member of the Pitt Meadows-Maple Ridge community for over 50 years, Ken Clarkson has led such a life. A 33-year career in education with 20 of those years as a teacher of grades 2 to 7. Today, Clarkson is chair of the school district's trustees. With this added vantage point, he can share with us his ideas about democratic control of our schools, the importance of public funding, and the purposes of public education as it emerges right in the classroom between teacher and student. We are pleased to welcome this thoughtful educator and community member to Your Education Matters. Ken, in order for us to have a context in which to frame your remarks, I'm going to ask you to tell about your personal story in Pitt Meadows, your biography, as well as your career in teaching.
Well, I moved with my family to Pitt Meadows in 1958, and I attended Pitt Meadows Elementary School, and then I went to Pitt Meadows Secondary School, and in grade 10 left to go play football at Maple Ridge Secondary School. Upon graduation, I went to Simon Fraser University, and that spring of my grade 12 year, John Young was controversial in the province in regards to a free school that he was starting on the island, and I remember writing a letter in support of that kind of education. I was quite a bit frustrated with my secondary education. I loved university, and at university I learned about A.S. Neal and Summerhill and John Holt, and there was a real feeling of renewal about to come to the public education school system, and so I decided to become a teacher. And in my teenage life, I'd spent a lot of time volunteering with Cubs and Scouts and coaching football and that kind of thing, so I really loved working with kids. And so I began teaching, and then did my PDP at SFU, and in those days they had open schools were quite prominent, and I did my practicum in some open schools. And I actually hitchhiked to Europe to go to see Summerhill, and I really wanted to work in that kind of environment, and the module that I was in for PDP was what they called free schools in those days. And then I began teaching in the public school system. Yeah, so.
Well, I don't think those of us that came up through the 60s guessed we'd be where we are in 2010 compared to the way innovation looked as it was emerging way back then.
I anticipated there has been a lot of change, I think, in the way kids are treated in schools, definitely. I remember I did an LIP project in Vancouver as a teacher assistant at a school in Vancouver, and I was quite disgusted with the way the children were treated. And I think we've definitely improved in that. They're treated with much more respect than those days. But in terms of the institution, I don't think it's experienced the change that the rest of the world has experienced.
I think we've made a lot of progress in how we deal with special needs children.
Yes, for sure.
And there's more respect for multiculturalism, I think. But I agree with you. I think we expected the individual student and their fulfillment to be more center stage, and for students not to be treated so much as cogs in an economic machine, which is what some of us read the testing movement is doing.
Yeah, the testing movement does that, and I don't think the schools have adapted to 21st century. We're anticipating that still, but it seems like we've been anticipating that kind of change for 33 years. I think the testing movement takes us backwards, and it's a kind of an accountability, what's the word, accountability operation that's not suitable to the 21st century learners.
Well, we seem to want to drive the schools on economic grounds and on grounds of what's called achievement. But many of us prefer the emphasis to be on the fulfillment of the individual and to let the economic grounds flow from that.
Yeah. For me as a teacher, the year 2000, we had the year 2001, what was it called? Educational, can't think of the name of it, with Barry Sullivan. He was the head of it. And that was bringing about, I think, more progressive means for students to achieve those individual kinds of things that we were after. And it had a lot to do with student evaluation. And I think we've had best practice in BC in terms of what to do. We had three-way conferences where students self-evaluated their own work. They brought their parents in. They showed examples of their work. At the end of the day, they left feeling some pride in that they've demonstrated their learning. They had some goals that they set for future learning, and it was a meaningful evaluation, and it was incorporated into every day. It wasn't something where you did something and at the end of the project you did a test. It was embedded in the learning, the evaluation was. But it didn't last, and I think the reason it didn't last is because teachers weren't treated that way. Teachers in those days were evaluated on a regular basis, and it was treated kind of more that factory kind of mode. And so when it came to then trying to treat students individually, then it fell apart. And I really believe that evaluation drives the system. The way we decide to evaluate will reflect the kind of system we have. And there are all kinds of ways of teaching people how to self-evaluate, and that's what fulfills us as people. You know, I'm a gardener, and I would stop gardening if every 3 months someone came in and gave me a letter grade as to what how my garden's progressing. I evaluate, one of the most pleasurable parts of my day is going in the evening after a day in the garden and evaluating what I've done, what needs to be done, what worked, what didn't work. We all do that, I think. That's what kind of adults we want. And we can model and we can set up environments so students can learn to do that. And I think we were making progress, and then some other thing got in our way, I think, which I think, like you say, has a lot to do with this kind of economics. I don't know.
Well, when you were teaching, do you think that you were improving yourself? Did you have tools to get information back from your classroom that helped you to understand what you could do better and what was especially successful? I mean, what was your process of self-improvement like?
Well, I think it wasn't too much unlike my garden. I tried to be determined not to teach the same thing every year, but to teach different children each year. And I tried to be reflective. I wrote journal. I would look at the end of each day. I think teaching is the most difficult job there is. I don't mean this to be derogatory, but when I grew up, my dad said, "Don't be a ditch digger." And I felt like, I believe that teachers are the ditch diggers of the modern world. They're right in the ditches. They're doing the real stuff. They're working hard every day. They're at the forefront of all the social injustice things that take place. They're battling for their students. Their hearts and souls are into it. And it's a really, really difficult job. And I think they need support. And I do think that the evaluation piece is being recognized in a sense that they're not being evaluated every year, but there isn't anything it hasn't been replaced by anything. There isn't a way of them gaining gratification. There isn't a way that where the institution itself says you're doing a good job. At one time in Maple Ridge, I was part of instituting it. We started a professional growth plan for teachers to replace the evaluation model. In those days, I was the professional coordinator for the district, professional development coordinator, and I attended a session at the BCTF building where West Vancouver had instituted a new evaluation process where teachers were given a score of 1 through 7, and they had all kinds of arbitrations and grievances resulting from these, because most teachers would be given a 6, which was a 7 was the highest, and they were grieving at why weren't they getting 7s. So to help alleviate that, the district began this professional growth plan. And that's where I heard about it and brought it back to our district. And we started a thing where every year a teacher would write down what they were going to achieve that year in terms of professional growth. And it too faded away. I think it needed to have been given more teeth, and we were looking at reinstituting some kind of a model like that again. Because while I'm not in favor of a evaluation process where someone comes into the class and then decides to assign some kind of a score to the teacher's performance, I don't think we should be doing nothing, which is what presently the situation is. So I would like to see a professional growth plan that's based on self-evaluation, has those principles that encourages the teacher to reflect on their behavior, to decide what they've done, what worked, what didn't work, what do we do next. And it needs to be embedded in the daily life of the teacher, unlike that outside person who comes in at the end of a term or something.
Well, I think there's always been a problem with the cost of doing meaningful evaluation with teachers. I often think, you know, how many person hours would you need from supervisors to give meaningful supervision to teachers? And it's not a trivial amount of time and money that you'd have to spend to make the supervision be meaningful. It's not as if one principal can manage 30 teachers plus do the principal's job and really know the work that all those teachers are doing. So I don't think the actual cost is talked about enough. For example, a student teaching in the U.S., the standard is usually one professor could watch over maybe 18 student teachers at a time, and that would be a full-time job for them. I wonder if public opinion is in line with what you perceive as the contributions of teachers. Do you think the public is appreciative of the work that teachers do?
Well, I think if you ask a parent how their child's teacher's doing, generally they're going to be very, very pleased. But when you, and the same, how was your school? They're going to be very, very pleased. In this closing school process we went through, and other districts have gone through, the teachers are always extremely pleased with their school, which is why they don't want to see it close. It represents their community. But then when they look at the broader education system, they generally have some criticisms. And I think it's because everybody's being in, most people have been a part at some point in their lives of the public school system. They've attended it, they feel like they have real knowledge, but you know, it's not the same being the student as it is being the teacher. And but they see that, and in a broader sense, teachers, like I said before, teachers are at the front lines of social justice. They see their individual children every day. They're a part of their lives for that time. They see when their lives perhaps are a bit deficient in some ways, and they feel compelled to do something, to speak about that. And that puts them in the front line, and then when you're in the front line, I think you're going to be subject to criticisms. And so I think that's where it comes from.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. We'll be back in just a moment.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Currently, you're chair of the trustees at Maple Ridge, Pitt Meadows. And after all these years of experience in the trenches, as you'd say, in the classroom, and bringing that experience to your job, and being a longtime citizen for more than 50 years of British Columbia, I'm curious as to which days and which experiences make you feel like you're doing a good job and you're really helping our children get to the next stage, and which days as a trustee you're frustrated, and which experiences are creating that frustration, and what we could do to change that so our trustees could do their jobs as well as they would like.
Okay, well, I guess days that I feel good are when I feel like what I enjoy the most about the process of being a trustee is that a group of people come together with diverse opinions and ideas, and at the end of the day we come out of it with a conclusion that none of us went into it with. I've always enjoyed that experience. It's what I loved about teaching and working with the staff. And I also love about teaching. And the same thing with school trustees. There's very few other opportunities where you work with women on the same equal level. in our society. And in teaching and in school trustees, it's totally equal. I really appreciate that. And as a trustee, so like I say, I love that decision-making process. And I guess the implicit to that is that the challenge is that doesn't always work. I really believe that conflict's inevitable. Some people want to avoid it or say that, you know, do whatever they can so that they don't have to deal with it. I believe that you face the fact conflict's inevitable, that you understand that the way you're going to get to a solution is how you deal with that conflict, is by listening to people, by being flexible, by hoping to honor and to look at other opinions and recognize that they can shape yours and we can all together create a better opinion. So that's what I enjoy about it. And I really do love the process that it's community-based. When I go down to the grocery store, I'll say to my wife, well, I'll see you in a couple hours rather than half an hour, because I know yesterday I got out of my car and I had 4 different conversations before I even got to the store. So I love that about the community that I live in, and I love that about being a school trustee for that community. And I hope that the reason they put me in that position is because that I'm respected for that kind of attitude. So.
Well, just as when you talk about gardening, I feel as though you have deep roots in that avocation. When you talk about democracy, I sense deep roots there too, and a real sensibility about how democracy should work in a place like BC, where it's working, where it isn't, where the blockages are, and what citizens should be alert to keep our democracy functioning at the highest level. For example, there's an ongoing debate about how many school trustees should be out there, how many boards of education, and what role do you see the boards of education and the trustees playing in this concept of democracy that you're experiencing when you go to the grocery?
Well, I think there's definitely one of the disappointment parts about being a trustee is we don't control what we're there to control. When I was a child, my neighbor was Davy Jones, who was trustee for Pitt Meadows in those days. And in those days, they set the tax rate for the individual municipalities. And if our school district decided not to close a school, and we felt the taxpayers were willing to pay more money to keep that school open, we could take that to the taxpayers, and they can make that choice. We can't do that anymore. And in so many ways, school trustees in BC have become figureheads. They're like pawns for the government. And I do think the present system needs to change. I don't know how, and I think we need to engage in that kind of discussion that I just described to you, where a diverse group of people come together from different backgrounds with different opinions, and we forge a new way to go in terms of school trustees. But reducing democracy by amalgamating school districts is definitely not the way to do it. We want to strengthen our community. We want to, you know, when I taught in Surrey for 13 years, one of the disappointing parts about that district for me was they had Cloverdale, Newton, Whalley, White Rock, all of these different communities, and I don't think you got the same sense of membership to that community because they were all Surrey. To me, it would be a more powerful community if those places were distinct. And so if we go to amalgamation, we're going to, I think, debase, we're going to undermine our communities. We want to have, the people need to have control over the things that affect them. And I think there's nothing more important than public education in terms of the viability and strength of an individual community.
As I understand it, our communities operate more that way on the political level for the other decisions. The councillors are able to vote on a budget and implement, and there's referenda taken to test the public will. Do you think that system is working in a way that fits with your notions of democratic process?
Well, in Maple Ridge, Pitt Meadows, we have a unique situation because they're two distinct municipalities, and the school board is not that unique. Coquitlam has a similar situation as well. But those two municipalities are able to come together. For instance, on Parks and Recreation, they work together. In many areas, they culturally and so forth, in the school district, they were able to work together. And in other areas, they're distinct. But to as there's some rumor about just amalgamating and forming huge school districts, I don't think that's the same. I don't honestly have the answer to what we should do. I think, there's been a lot of clamor over the years about people saying that to reduce costs, Pitt Meadows and Maple Ridge should amalgamate. I've been a member of both communities, and I would be a fierce supporter of not amalgamating. I think they work just fine as distinct communities, and I just want to see school boards need to be given some kind of power. Right now we don't have any.
That amalgamation took place in Toronto, of course, a few years ago, and they created the largest district in Canada, about 300,000 students. Against the public's will, it was very clear the public didn't want it. They amalgamated 7 districts. And it's been a very difficult district to manage ever since. We don't have a clear sense of scale in these things, but there is a point at which you create organizations that are too big. I'll give you an example. In Canada now, they've just about completed this notion that if you have a teaching certificate in any province, it's good across the country. Now the problem with that is it kind of drives things to the lowest common denominator and generalizes in a field that's not like plumbing or electricity, electrician, where the plumbing and the electrician work may be the same in every province, but the teaching isn't. No. You don't necessarily know the people, the minority groups, the special problems, and the history of that place. So sometimes these movements to grow the scale of an institution larger and larger doom it to failure. That doesn't matter to the people who are anti-government. They thrive when government stumbles. But to those of us that work in roles that are within government, like public education, it makes us grow frustrated because we know that we're being undermined in the ability to do our jobs at the proper level just because of the scale we're asked to work in. In the U.S. right now with health insurance, they're doing a similar thing where they want to take down all the state regulations about health insurance, and in a country of 300 million people regulate health insurance across the whole country. And the Canadian model of holding certain standards to the province and then letting the province work through more how they meet those standards seems to work. So there's a lot to consider in how we implement democracy. And the school trustees are in the front lines of this because for most people, I think it's their strongest connection to their community where they feel the most responsiveness through their political system.
I did a teaching exchange to Scotland for a year, and what struck me there was both the centralization of that country, their newspapers, their television stations, the political realm, all came from London. And everything was centralized in London. And I just think we're a much more vibrant community when the people who are affected by the decisions make the decisions.
Now, in fairness, one of the reasons that they did things like take financial control centrally in a lot of places is because there were always some districts, I'm speaking from my experience growing up in Ohio now, that got a tradition of starving their schools and weren't bringing their schools to minimum adequate funding. So that would be the other side of the argument. I think the truth of the matter is that no one solution works forever.
But I think it goes on a pendulum. I've looked at the history of BC in terms of the school districts, and it starts off being centralized, then it becomes more autonomy, and it goes back. And I think we're at the extreme end right now of centralization. It was actually the NDP that brought about they got rid of local bargaining and tried to go to political bargaining with teachers. I think it's been an abysmal failure, but they went there for the reasons you're saying because they thought that some districts were getting not getting the amount of financial support that other districts were getting, so they went to a centralized system for ability of fairness. But I think local bargaining worked much better for all the reasons I said about how it strengthens communities. I think it's far more purposeful for the community. If I run into the grocery store and I run to the teacher who's sitting across the bargaining table, if I'm the trustee, and we can have a conversation versus it being totally out of our hands and somebody in Victoria who would take me a day and a week to get a hold of and wouldn't understand our situation, they're in charge of the bargaining for our district. I just don't understand that. I recognize that there's two sides to the argument, but I think the pendulum has swung too far.
Okay, thank you, Ken. We'll be back in a moment. Many of us do not have the opportunity to work and live in one community in which we have a public role while experiencing a cross-section of the place over many decades. Those who have this opportunity can obtain deep and powerful insights into the culture of that place. Through such knowledge, they can help us understand ourselves, our victories, and our frustrations. Teachers are often such an asset to a town or city, and we typically do not have the forums to hear them out and benefit from that experience. Teachers have the added opportunity to know the rising generations of children and youth, watching them pass through the stages of life to inherit leadership in their hometowns. Their stories, the stories our teachers share about our lives, and the good insights they draw from decades of personal involvement are priceless and poignant. They come from the heart with all their humanity intact. We are pleased to bring them to you on Your Education Matters.
The only evaluation that is deep and truly meaningful is self-evaluation. All others, and there are many, are superficial and self-serving. Do you plant sunflowers, watch them grow, judge which one is fast, which one's slow? They do that to children, you know. Which will shine, reach its prime, which will cry, fly, imagine reasons why. Have you grown sunflowers through the sunshine and the showers, anticipating them at their peak, awed at nature's feet? Big heads, yellow petals, no gold metals, spiral patterns, intricate, a child's mind does fit. In august rapture, impossible to capture the sanctity of all. Small ones become tall, the tall small. At the end of the season, what reason for the slow to grow are the best of the show? Hard to contemplate, let alone rate, which is better than the other. Why do we bother? A gardener cannot shun the beauty of each one. A significant event, a unique event. Let them shine, help them find. Do our best, not test, test, test. Why grade each one? Love lost done. Think they don't know, lest they grow too slow? Less trust, more measure. Losing sight of our treasure. We inflict on the young, but for ourselves we will have none. If you're a teacher, then you know what gets planted does grow.